On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a woman named Betty Bersinger was taking a morning walk along Norton Avenue in Los Angeles when she noticed something lying in a vacant lot. At first glance, she thought it was a discarded mannequin. It wasn't. What Betty had stumbled upon was the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, and what had been done to her was so precise, so deliberate, and so horrifying that the case would go on to become one of the most infamous unsolved murders in American history. This is the chilling mystery of the Black Dahlia. Elizabeth Short had been born in Boston in 1924, the third of 5 daughters. As a young woman, she dreamed of becoming an actress and had made her way to Los Angeles chasing that dream. She was described by those who knew her as charming, vivacious, and strikingly beautiful, with dark hair and pale skin that made her stand out in any crowd. She was 22 years old when she was killed. She had barely begun her life. What Betty Bersinger found that morning was a body so pale and so completely drained of blood that it appeared almost artificial. Elizabeth had been cut cleanly in half at the waist with a precision that investigators and medical experts said indicated significant knowledge of surgery or human anatomy. There was no blood whatsoever on the ground around her, meaning she had been killed somewhere else entirely, and her body had been carefully posed and placed at the scene afterward. Her face had been cut from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, creating a permanent, haunting expression. The cuts were clean. The work was deliberate. Whoever did this had taken their time. 9 days after the body was discovered, an envelope arrived at the offices of the Los Angeles Examiner. It was addressed using letters cut out from movie advertisements, assembled into words like a ransom note. The message read, quote, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." Inside the envelope was a collection of Elizabeth's personal items, her social security card, her birth certificate, photographs, and an address book with several pages deliberately torn out. Gasoline had been rubbed across the contents to destroy any fingerprints. Additional letters followed in the days after, including one signed simply, the Black Dahlia Avenger, a name that the press immediately seized upon, and the case has carried ever since. Investigators traced Elizabeth's final known movements to San Diego, where she had been staying with a man named Robert Manley. Manley drove her to Los Angeles and helped her check into the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA. That hotel is believed by many to be the last confirmed location where Elizabeth was seen alive. After Manley drove back to San Diego, Elizabeth reportedly made her way to a nearby bar called the Crown Grill. After that, the trail went completely cold. Nobody knows where she went next, who she met, or what happened to her in the hours and days before her body appeared on Norton Avenue. Over the decades, investigators have named over 500 potential suspects, but 3 names have stood out above all others as the most compelling. The first is Robert Manley himself, the last man confirmed to have been with Elizabeth before her death. However, Manley returned to San Diego nearly a week before her body was found, passed a polygraph test administered by investigators, and was later administered sodium pentothal, which authorities at the time believed to be a reliable truth serum. Under both tests, he showed no knowledge of the crime. He was eventually cleared as a suspect, though he was later committed to a psychiatric hospital in 1954 after reporting he was hearing voices. The second suspect was an Army corporal named Joseph Dumais, who came forward claiming he had been blackout drunk with Elizabeth in San Francisco just days before her body was discovered. When investigators asked him directly whether he believed he could have killed her, he said yes. However, military records confirmed he was on his base at the time of her death. He too was cleared. The third suspect is the most compelling by far, and the one that Elizabeth's case has circled back to again and again for decades. His name was George Hodel. George was a highly intelligent, deeply disturbing figure. He had studied surgery and medicine, and later ran Los Angeles County's venereal disease clinic, a background that gave him the precise anatomical knowledge the killer demonstrated. He had 11 children by 5 different women. He lived in a distinctive house in the hills above Los Angeles, inside which he kept a secret room that his own children were forbidden from entering. George's son, Steve Hodel, grew up to spend 17 years as an LAPD investigator. After retiring from the force, Steve became convinced that his own father had killed Elizabeth Short. He began building a case from the outside in, gathering evidence piece by piece. Among his discoveries was a series of photographs inside his father's personal albums, showing a woman that Steve believed to be Elizabeth Short. In 2014, facial recognition technology analyzed the photographs and produced a match between 90 and 95%. But as with so much of the evidence in this case, the results were ultimately ruled inconclusive. Steve also analyzed letters sent to police and media by the apparent killer and compared them to samples of his father's handwriting. Expert opinion on the comparison ranged from probable to inconclusive, meaning no definitive match could be established, but the similarity was enough to warrant serious attention. George had also been accused by his own daughter of sexual assault, charges for which he was tried and ultimately found not guilty. Then came the wiretap. At some point during their investigation, LAPD detectives had placed listening devices inside George Hodel's home. On those recordings, George was captured saying, quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." In a separate recorded conversation, he was also heard discussing what he described as a payoff arrangement involving law enforcement and expressing a desire to make a connection inside the district attorney's office. Despite these recordings, the LAPD dropped George Hodel as a suspect and closed the investigation. Shortly after, he left the United States permanently, spending the rest of his life living abroad in Asia. He died in 1999 without ever being charged. It is also worth noting that the LAPD during this era was notoriously and extensively corrupt. The physical evidence collected during the original Black Dahlia investigation, all of it, has since disappeared from official records and storage. There is no confirmed explanation for where it went. Steve Hodel has suggested that his father may have paid off officers to ensure the investigation died quietly. Others believe it was simply a failure of record-keeping in a corrupt department. Either way, without that physical evidence, the case cannot be formally resolved, regardless of what other evidence exists. In 2012, Steve Hodel returned to his childhood home with a cadaver dog trained to detect human remains. The dog indicated at multiple points on the property. Soil samples were taken from the alley behind the house and tested positive for human remains. Elizabeth Short's body was never buried, so the remains found on the property cannot be directly tied to her case. But the discovery strongly suggests that George Hodel's relationship with death extended far beyond anything his family had been willing to acknowledge. Steve Hodel has continued to pursue permission to excavate the property more thoroughly. The LAPD has declined to assist or reopen the investigation. The case of the Black Dahlia remains officially unsolved. More than 75 years after Betty Bersinger found a body in a vacant lot and changed the course of American true crime history, nobody has ever been charged. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old. She wanted to be an actress. She never got the chance, and the man who took that chance away from her has never faced justice. What do you think happened? Drop your theory in the comments. And if you want more cases like this, subscribe to Mystery Minute. We'll be here every week, digging up the truth.